Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best in class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration tools. And we work with life science companies, pharmaceutical, medical device, biotech companies across the globe to help them virtualize their in-person meetings, be it advisory boards, working groups, delivering medical education, clinical trial investigator groups. And since COVID-19, we've been helping people do things like POA brand rollouts, sales and MSL training, and other things like that. But more importantly, we really believe at Impetus that everything starts with a thought. And with a thought comes a courageous conversation. So what we've been trying to do at Impetus is build a platform that will allow these continuous, important, thought-provoking conversations so that we can actually work with provocateurs, leading-edge thinkers like the Peter Birches of the world who are doing things really different and really bleeding edge so that we can all collectively work together to positively disrupt healthcare. So we are certainly very happy to have Peter Birch at the table today with us, having a discussion with us on the Impetus podcast. He's actually joining us from Sydney, Australia. So I was just joking with him that while I'm having a glass of wine, he's actually having his cup of coffee. And it's always fun to talk to somebody in the future. But all kidding aside, he's actually a very experienced healthcare executive with a proven track record of helping HealthTech startups in the APEC, so the Asia Pacific area and region, lift into the scale-up phase and going beyond. He's currently the general manager of the Asia Pacific group at MetaOptima. We're going to find out all about what that company does, which is really cool stuff. And he's working to create intelligent technology to help doctors detect and treat skin cancer. So he's obviously located in the right part of the world. He's also the director of the Medical Software Industry Association, and he represents software vendors at the healthcare industry in Australia. Finally, he's also the creator and host of Talking Health Tech. That's actually how I found him, was through podcasts. And he has a podcast featuring conversations with influential doctors, developers, decision makers, playing on the Australian HealthTech scene. So he started this in 2018. I'm going to want to find out more about this. And the podcast has grown so quickly and there's so much popularity that he's now expanded a membership community and a media company focused on health tech. So welcome, Peter. Quite an impressive background. So happy to have you on the show.
Hey, how you doing? Oh, thank you. You give me a lot more credit than I'm worth, but I'm really looking forward to having this conversation.
Absolutely. So we're going to kind of start off with you, first of all, before we get into what MetaOptima does. But you have an interesting background yourself. You started off with a business degree, so an MBA, and a professional kind of accounting degree with a CPA. So tell us a little bit about this journey. How did you end up going from business to health tech? And how did you get interested in this field in the first place?
Yeah, I actually started out when I left high school in like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, looking to get a job into an advertising agency, writing copy for radio. Funnily enough, that was how I all kind of started my career. And then I thought I'd get a job over the Christmas holidays in between studies to see me through so I can pay the bills. And that job that I got was at making outbound calls to doctor surgeries at a company called International SOS, and it's a global organization, lots of different facets, mostly known for emergency assistance, so helping you if you fall sick overseas. But the work I was doing was very entry level at that organization. I stayed with International SOS for 9 years, so that wasn't the plan when I started, but I stayed there and I worked into various roles of within the team on the phones through to operations like team leader roles, operations manager roles in different departments and different opportunities that presented. The role at International SOS also enabled me the opportunity to travel back in the day when we used to be able to travel. No, we can't travel right now. But I was able to go to the Philadelphia office, the London office, and help scale out teams there, and then also bring back a lot of learnings to Australia. One of my last roles at International SOS was I was managing the provider network of aviation companies and hospitals and clinics that were delivering services on behalf of International SOS. And then in that role introduced me to like that, the concept of networking within the health care industry kind of started me on my pathway of moving into a larger insurance company called Medibank here in Australia, and then across to Sonic Healthcare, where I was running groups of bricks and mortar clinics. So I was a head of an organization that employed doctors and nurses and admin staff to deliver services for travel medicine. So to make sure you are ready before you go overseas. And so again, the healthcare industry, that was my constant. An opportunity presented to move out of big bad corporate world into the fun, crazy life of startups. And I took a role at a company called MediRecords, which here in Australia makes a cloud-based practice management system. So like an EMR for general practitioners. And the concept of cloud-based technology within the practice management space is kind of somewhat foreign. They're normally server-based systems, quite a system that's just been around for a very long time, quite antiquated technology. So being able to develop something that was new and on the edge and something that needed to be embraced by healthcare was kind of really fascinating to me, and seeing that the blend between the opportunities that technology can present and the problems that need to be solved in healthcare really drove me on. So we had some success in MediRecords, and then it brought me to my current role at MetaOptima today. So yeah, it's the undercurrent has always been there of the business side of the MBA and the CPA. I'm not the usual accountant. I've not had an official accounting role, but the concept of having control of the numbers and a deep understanding was something that I was interested in. So I've got a pretty broad understanding, but that constant undercurrent of the healthcare and technology space, which has driven me on.
So wonderful. And what an absolutely amazing trajectory. And I agree, having all of that varied experience and touching on a variety of things, including numbers, probably only gives you that more holistic view and the ability to probably assess startups in terms of their profitability and their ability and the probability, if you will, of their success. So I do think that's really interesting that you have that. So it brings you to MetaOptima. So what's interesting about this, obviously being Canadian, is that this is a company that started in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. So, and I guess found its way over to Australia, obviously because of the amount of sunshine and probably the incidence of skin cancers there probably made sense. So tell us a little bit about how you found or how they found you, and what your role is currently at MetaOptima.
Sure. So I was approached for the role at MetaOptima. I was within my role at MediRecords at the time, and just rolling out a contract with a large state health department, which was all very exciting and a good opportunity for a great platform for that organization to build upon. And me, myself personally, second child was on the way. So looking for that stability of a role was like, this is perfect. And approached for this role about, hey, we need to find someone to essentially do it again. But this time, first person on the ground, a company out of Vancouver. And I've not heard of the company, not heard of the founders. And, at the time wasn't in that right headspace for the gig, but hearing more about the technology and seeing the problem that was being solved, and also seeing some of the backing that the company had to come into Australia. So it just raised Series A capital through two quite prominent VCs in Australia, Skip Capital and Airtree. And so they're headed by Scott Farquhar, who's a co-founder of Atlassian, obviously big company in Australia and globally, but founded in Australia, and Daniel Petrie of Airtree, who was the general manager for Microsoft Australia back in the day, and worked quite closely with Bill Gates over the time. So having Daniel and Scott as essentially mentors to help kind of scale the business in Australia, at least from a board perspective, was really enticing. But then also seeing the technology and the advancements that we made, and already the waves that it was making within the, I guess, the skin cancer community in Australia from afar, it was enough to get me to come across. So so since then I've been with the company for a bit over 2 years now, and we've got a team of 8 people in Australia delivering support and customer success and clinical and technical roles too.
Beautiful. So let's actually just spend a couple of minutes describing to the audience here, what does MetaOptima do? Give us your business model.
Sure. So we make technology to help doctors diagnose and detect skin cancer using artificial intelligence and other advanced technologies. So we make 2 products predominantly, and actually a few more now, but predominantly Derm Engine, which is our core product. And Derm Engine is a software platform. So it's a cloud-based system that you, as a clinician, can connect to your practice management system or EMR, and the system they use in the clinics, to then manage the workflow of doing a skin check. And we're focused it right now on skin cancer because that's a workflow that normally requires imaging, or for it to be done well requires imaging and mapping of these lesions on a body map and other bits and pieces, which are usually pretty hard to do in terms of a consult-based EMR. When you've got a patient who's come in there, so you're monitoring a lesion over 3 or 4 years, you don't want to be scrolling through 3 or 4 years of notes to find when you took a picture of this particular spot. So having it being able to map images on Derm Engine of your moles or suspicious lesions, having it available to the clinician, but also enabling a patient app too. So patients are able to download the MoleScope app and take their own images of their lesions, and then have that sent across through to their clinician to then have that monitoring done from a distance as well. And this was all pre-COVID that we were building this out. But I guess predominantly on a day-to-day, it's used by the clinicians to manage their skin checks, and now more broadly by dermatologists to manage other dermatology issues as well, psoriasis, eczema, and bits and pieces.
So really interesting though about what we're talking about here. There's lots of discussion around smart algorithms and the ImageNet and the way that images are being actually managed. And so tell us a little bit about some of that original research that went into this and how that's being built into the algorithm for assessment, detection, and like you were saying, the layering in over time to detect those really small changes that may not be visible to the naked eye.
Sure. We could do multiple episodes to talk about the excitements of of talking about AI, but I'll keep it at a high level. In terms of the research and everything that had gone in, the 2 founders of MetaOptima both did their PhDs in this particular space of utilizing AI to diagnose skin cancer, and from the technology side, that's always been very core to what we do on a day-to-day, and research and development. Our research and development team is probably still our largest team within the business, located in Vancouver. We've in 2018 we entered and won a competition called the ISIC Challenge, which is essentially utilizing the 3 algorithms that we submitted to this competition. Came first, second, and third, and the competition was to diagnose 7 different types of skin cancers using, a proprietary AI. And so we did that with a high level of confidence, which was, I guess, when you look at any other research, much greater in terms of accuracy, specificity, and consistency compared to any of the best dermatologists globally. And that's not to say that the technology is there to replace the dermatologists or the clinicians in terms of their ability to diagnose, but like anything that requires pattern recognition or the same task over and over again, it is much better handled by technology than people. You've got so many variables of the people in terms of their mood, their the time of day, the consistency. We're only human, so being able to have the technology to help them deliver the services, not replace them, is really important, and in the end will result in more efficient service for the clinician to be able to deliver, or to be able to deliver more services, and also then better safety and more accurate results over a longer term, less false positives or false negatives. So that's
fantastic. That is brilliant. And it's so in terms of the technology, and we hear a lot about unsupervised learning, we talk about neural networks and basically machines that get smarter with time. Has that been built in intrinsically in the algorithm that you've developed with your own IP? In essence, that these either institutionally or as a company, does the algorithm get smarter as more data is inputted?
Yeah, look, there's quite a few areas within Derm Engine that I guess harness AI for different reasons. So we utilize AI within Derm Engine for workflow efficiency. So things like if you're a doctor and you took a picture of, my mole on my arm, rather than trying to find my arm on a body map to see whether you've taken a picture of it before, we've got a feature called Smart Snap, which then looks for that image and then says, you've already taken a picture of this lesion. Do you want to map it to here? So those kinds of constant learning things always happen in the back end, and that's all still done without humans seeing the images on the algorithm doing it in a de-identified way, just pattern recognition, which is there. We also have a ability within Derm Engine to then track if a lesion's changed over time, and again that is constantly learning and improving over time. We also have a feature within Derm Engine called Visual Search, which is essentially where you would take a picture of a lesion and then I've colloquially termed it Shazam for moles, but I'm not sure whether that's an official term or not. But basically, where you could say this, where the system will then say this lesion looks visually similar to these ones, and these ones have been diagnosed either clinically or via pathology as these. So that is just purely determining based on what it looks like compared to what we have, and that's but that's not sharing images that other people take, and it's not like you're going to see another clinic's images in there. That database is essentially a closed thing where we've got authority from those individuals to use that for our database. But there's all these other kind of areas in terms of research and development we're doing that we're seeing, not just taking the pattern recognition side as the determinant for a diagnosis or recommendation, but also other factors that someone might enter in as well in terms of symptoms or other bits and pieces too. So there's some exciting developments on the way.
Absolutely. Want to understand a little bit about the business model as well. You've mentioned the idea about reductions in false positives or false negatives, making things more accurate. Obviously, there's an advantage about not treating somebody by mistake or under treating. And then, of course, you're suggesting that you're not necessarily going to be replacing pathologists or diagnosticians. Ultimately, you've heard a lot about these written. Eric Topol has written tons and tons of books about deep medicine and all sorts of other things, and concerns ultimately that physicians have of eventually becoming just glorified data scientists or outright becoming replaced. And so certainly the first concern would be, like you said, dermatologists or other people who are diagnosing conditions like that. How do you verify or validate the business model if what you're really suggesting is that this is in addition to what you're already paying healthcare system for physicians? Is there a way to validate, or have you actually done cost modeling to show that there is actually benefits?
Yeah, I mean, when we go through with a clinician about the use of Derm Engine in their practice, the ROI calculation becomes pretty clear pretty quickly in terms of when we look at their workflow, what they're doing right now, even just from even taking away the AI component for a second, or at least not focusing purely on that from a diagnostic perspective, but just from a workflow efficiency side of the amount of work that clinicians do when they're doing sequential imaging with dermoscopy is huge. The amount of admin work they would do after seeing a patient, they might spend an hour uploading images off a phone or off a camera into a device, and it's not something they can normally outsource to someone else within the practice because they're the one that have taken the picture of a lesion and they know which patient that is, and the potential for error is so high in terms of putting the wrong image onto the wrong patient. So it's just an area that, and in Australia where 2 out of 3 Australians get skin cancer, and most general practitioners, like your family GP, are the ones doing skin checks. So I guess Australia is a little bit different to everywhere else in the world, where because skin cancer is such a prevalent issue, most family GPs have, like, on a day-to-day, will see skin cancer patients on a day-to-day. A family GP is more likely to see more melanomas than in Australia, is more likely to see more melanomas than a dermatologist in Canada, for example. So that's just the Molotov cocktail of different environmental and other kind of factors that we've got in Australia that mean that we're highly susceptible to skin cancer. In terms of the cost benefits, though, it's just the reduction in terms of the time and effort in terms of doing effective imaging and dermoscopy that we can bring, and potentially bringing in more patients for that particular clinic. But also we enable more services that the clinician can deliver too. So by utilizing Derm Engine, they can do more things like total body photography or other services for patients that are more value adding. That is also good from a clinician's perspective, looking at patient retention, because they can have patients' images being stored securely within their clinic, and then the patient's more likely to come back to the clinic for the second or third review that they do. There are a lot of more, like, we're constantly involved in clinical trials, and there's other studies currently underway that are demonstrating from a clinical perspective, not just the business side, about the efficacy of patients taking their own lesions for diagnosis, as well as the use of the AI for the diagnostic side. So there's going to be some interesting developments in the coming months as well from those studies.
So would be interested, as we're still talking about the business side of things, is as it relates to the clinical studies and various regulatory approval and reimbursement models as it relates specifically to Australia. I mean, obviously every country has their own mechanisms for doing that. So as you're enrolling patients in these clinical studies and you're actually being able to derive efficacy and efficacy comparisons, how are you leveraging that data from both a regulatory and a reimbursement standpoint? Who cares about this information? What is this going to do from an approval standpoint? But more importantly, who is ultimately going to be turned on by this data from a reimbursement standpoint?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of payers who would be really interested in this. I mean, from within Australia, the federal government pays majority of the for Medicare in Australia, which involves the consultations and the pathology tests and everything that's involved in performing skin checks. And this stat's global as well. I think for every one positive diagnosis of a skin cancer, there are 36 other benign diagnoses as well. So 1 in 36 biopsies that are performed are actually necessary. So, there's a lot of wastage in terms of unnecessary biopsies being performed, the bill is being footed by the government. And then, when you look at skin cancer, the problem is, skin cancers, if they're detected early, it's not a costly, treatment that's undergone in terms of removal of a lesion and then ongoing monitoring. But if it's detected at a late stage, the cost goes into, the hundreds of thousands per patient. So, without doing ongoing monitoring, the potential to the private health insurance companies who end up footing the bill for ongoing treatment, drugs and everything is huge. So the interest from them is high in terms of getting more patients to be able to get skin checks done regularly and in a quality way. Because even though, you know, like I mentioned before, the 2 out of 3 Aussies that get skin cancer, only 10% of Australians who are at risk actually get skin checks done on an annual basis, which is even more concerning around, you know, with COVID, given that more people are putting off their, you know, their usual healthcare until things blow over. So there's certainly interest from a regulatory perspective, you know, and something that we don't do right now in Australia, and there's a lot of lobbying and interest in getting it done, is that even though skin cancer and the, you know, it's well proven that, you know, preventative skin checks are you know, there's a benefit to every player within that ecosystem. There's still no, like, the only reimbursement that's provided by the government for skin checks is for like the standard consultation that takes place, not for any additional work that they might be performing for doing skin checks. So there's definitely a lot of interest by a number of parties in terms of lobbying and saying, hey, we need a national skin check program, or we need more support from the government at that early preventative stage, rather than relying so much on the let's just treat it when it happens stage.
So currently, is it the actual individual institutions, if they're incorporating Derm Engine, for example, alongside their electronic health records, are they paying for it themselves? And then you're providing MoleScope, which again, just as a reminder to the audience, is the app available to actual people, consumers, patients. Is that how it currently is created?
Yeah, in the end, the clinics or the end users, the doctors, would buy a subscription to Derm Engine and to utilize the software within their practices. They would also buy, we make MoleScope. MoleScope is the app, but it's also a piece of hardware that you can stick onto your mobile phone, which does high quality dermoscopic image, like a close-up image of your mole. And patients do buy those, but also clinicians buy them as well. So that's, it's not a government funded program or anything. It's those clinicians that see the, you know, we've got a lot of skin cancer clinics in Australia. So dedicated like GPs that are focused in skin cancer. And so majority of skin cancer clinics around Australia would use Derm Engine these days.
I see what you're saying. So it's almost in some ways like this app, this virtual app store. And as part of the routine maintenance or any other prescriptions that the dermatologist or other clinician might be providing, they may give a patient this choice of participating in this and using this as another mechanism to help to monitor and sustain what's going on with their skin conditions.
Yeah. And also given, I mean, we've got a big country, but not a lot of people live in the middle of it, right? So there's, you know, in terms of access to healthcare, it's quite difficult. So being able to provide services to, you know, we've got a lot of patients who would normally fly interstate to go see a dermatologist. We've got 25 million people and only 400 dermatologists. So, and that's in Australia. So you've got patients from the Northern Territory who'll have to fly down to South Australia to be able to see a dermatologist in normal times. Now, these days, being able to do that is obviously very difficult, and it's difficult to do that anyway. So being able to have ongoing monitoring with existing patients, that's been really appealing for clinicians to say, hey, rather than having to bring them in all the time, I can ask them to take images with their MoleScope app. They can send them through. I can then review as needed, and we enable billing through that if they want to do that too. And then that way we're not opening up, say, a free-for-all for anyone to just take a picture of their mole. Like, it's not, we haven't got essentially a pure B2C play where, you know, you go to the app store and download the MoleScope app and send in a picture of your mole to see whether you've got cancer or not. I feel like that's a little bit, there's a big gap there because that's missing a really important part of the healthcare kind of ecosystem, which is bringing your regular clinician through the journey to and also having that connection back to a point of care. So we very much deal with the clinicians on a day-to-day and help enabling them to deal more closely with their patients. So tools like MoleScope and Derm Engine will help them do that.
So interesting that you say this as you talk about, making sure that there's a full circuit around including the healthcare providers part of this equation. One of the things that we're noticing in Canada, I'm sure you're probably running into similar conversations with COVID-19 in Australia, is the shortage of supply of COVID-19 tests and the providers and the people and the administrators of these tests. So there's a discussion and a discourse going on right now about expanding scope of work from everything from pharmacists to pharmaceutical company lab technicians to everybody and his brother. So I'm just wondering, with the smart technology of Derm Engine, of the ability to leverage, if you will, curated and collated and aggregated results from certain institutions to be able to do compare and contrast and comparisons. Would it make sense over time to include the scope of work for people like nurse practitioners, pharmacists, other types of allied healthcare providers to expand the minimized numbers of specialists, and then perhaps only funnel up the really dire cases or the really important cases, and just the regular, just like contact tracing or basically testing, COVID-19 testing, the generalized overviews and reviews by a more robust group of practitioners. Is that something that's being considered as part of your advocacy?
Yeah, and it's happening it's already happening. There are a bunch of roles that I didn't know existed before I started here that, and they're highly qualified. Sometimes nurses, sometimes not even nurses. It could be technicians who have made a career in taking images of lesions. So roles like a melanographer or a dermoscopist in Australia that are, because, and particularly in New Zealand as well. Like I said, we've got 400 dermatologists in Australia. We've got 40 dermatologists in New Zealand for a country of 5 million people. I think, it might be more than 40 these days. But, you can look at a list of them in about 10 minutes and know who the dermatologists are in the country. So it's obvious that they're not all going to handle, and New Zealand is right up there in terms of melanomas per capita is almost as bad as, it's actually, I think it's worse than Australia. So in terms of the problem to be solved, it's already, there in terms of having trained images, I guess, but people taking images of lesions out in the field or, on site to then have those aggregate up through, in a way. We've got a component within Derm Engine, which is called e-triage, essentially. So it's where, utilizing the AI, images can be taken by GPs or melanographers or other parts of the, within a network. And then there could be one dermatologist or skin cancer GP receiving all the images, and then who can then diagnose them. But rather than having hundreds of images come to them one by one, we'll then use the AI to put them in buckets and say, these ones all look benign, do you agree? Or these ones all look suspicious, you're going to have to look through them one by one. Or these ones we don't know. And that's the AI saying, well, you're going to have to, again, make a call on these. So it's not making it's just helping sort things to make the process faster for the clinician. It's not going to be something in the end that rests on the technology to make the call. The clinician still makes the decision, but they don't have to go out to these different sites to collect the images themselves. And normally someone like a melanographer is way better at taking images than a doctor might be anyway. That they need to be focusing on their speciality, which is the diagnostic side, but then the ongoing treatment and engagement with the patient.
I think it's brilliant. First of all, I've never heard of a melanographer, so I think that's terrific that people are trained to do that. But I also think it's just absolutely brilliant about the idea of classifying and aggregating and creating a triage system that I think truly is going to save the Australian government large swaths of money on that particular model. I think it's really, really brilliant. So I would be remiss not to talk a little bit about the effects of COVID-19, specifically either in a positive or a negative impact on your business. But more specifically, it sounds like you've developed a lot of these technologies and this, the MolScope, which is the ability for patients to interact and to be able to upload their own things. How has COVID-19 impacted what dermatologists are or not doing and what patients are or not doing around potential skin lesions and what have you. Has your technology skyrocketed just like telemedicine has, and suddenly now all of this stuff is being brought to everybody's attention of, wow, this is really great stuff and now I can do this? Or is it people just being fearful and not wanting to move ahead with doing anything new?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's interesting looking at the developments within Derm Engine specifically that have taken place since COVID have obviously been centered around telemedicine and the enablement of care remotely. But none of these features are brand new on our roadmap. They've just been brought forward because pre-COVID, like, we always had the vision of being able to enable this type of service, but the market readiness probably, definitely wasn't there, whether in Australia or other parts, particularly in Australia. It was the eventuality that was going to happen in terms of more care enabled by technology, but probably more realistically over a time frame of 5 to 10 years rather than 5 to 10 days, which is what happened. When I think the trigger point for Australia, obviously, and in other parts of the world, was when funding options were opened up by Medicare in terms of telemedicine, and that whilst there's not Medicare items for taking images, there are Medicare items for doing teleconsults. And so all of a sudden, the interest from the skin cancer GPs in particular, and those seeing, the dermatology providers, was there, and to be able to see patients who need services who weren't willing to come into a clinic or couldn't come into a clinic for obvious reasons. So yeah, I think that we've definitely seen an uptick in terms of the use of the platform. It's funny though, within healthcare generally, the term skyrocket can be a relative term when looking at other industries. Like, as we all know, healthcare is a lot slower in terms of uptake of technology, even through a pandemic. I think that it's going as fast as I think it can, because of all, like, there's still reservation and uncertainty in terms of, well, am I going to be utilizing this over a longer period of time? Am I going to be, and a lot of people feel that this is just the way that things are done now, and taking that longer term view. There are still going to be many, that represent a big bulk of, say, our bulk billing GP clinics in Australia that might take a view of, well, I'm just going to wait and see and wait for the rest of the early adopters to come on board. But in terms of the adoption over this year, we have generally seen a huge increase in terms of the utilization on a day to day. But when clinicians are I just love that constant battle of implementing technology in healthcare, where you've got all these innovative and really cool and interesting ideas to solve big problems, selling it to clinicians who, in the end, the clinicians carry all the risk and the potential for litigation. Everything falls back on them solely as an individual. So and all the clinicians in Australia, and I think it's the same elsewhere in the world, they're not employees of big corporations. They're, in the end, they're sole practitioners that are contracted to work on behalf of these companies. So even if the company then rolled out a platform across all their clinicians in Australia, it still comes down to the individual clinician's choice about whether they're going to use this platform and have confidence in us or not. So this reliance on our relationships with the single GPs, as well as being able to influence that at an enterprise level, is just this really challenging battle, which is what keeps driving me within the health technology space more broadly, to help us try and scale solutions in a hyper-personalized way.
Yeah, and what better person to understand the scalability and the acceleration of adoptions of innovations that yourself, I guess, working with a lot of tech startups. I guess, unfortunately, in healthcare, it's really the one place where you can't go wild and break things. I mean, if you break things, people die. So we have to be careful. With this note around clinical studies, a lot of life science companies had a lot of their clinical studies stop abruptly and very rudely, just had this abrupt stop. And this was really concerning, especially as we talk about, the eventuality of decreased, discoveries and, basically time is money. And so I was just curious about either, historically, after, prior to COVID and maybe afterwards, if people would be considering technologies like yours to use yours as another type of sensor technology where data can be inputted for skin cancers, but I'm just wondering eventually for other types of discoveries. And I'm thinking specifically using these to take pictures of, like, again, embedding maybe or marrying it with facial recognition software, being able to look at the various colorations of flesh and determining if somebody is feeling anxious or depressed, and being able to do other sorts of telemedicine diagnostic type of testing and leveraging these kind of smart algorithms. Do you have any thoughts on what that has been doing or what people were leveraging it for and what it could be used in the future?
Yeah, I think there are some really interesting, I guess, emotion recognition type companies and the use of AI for those types of functions that are really cool. In terms of Derm Engine, where we doubled down in terms of skin cancer to solve an immediate problem, and that's, we've really owned that space, and then we'll broaden out from there in terms of more dermatology. Again, leveraging what we're good at, which is the diagnostic or the recognition side in terms of potential ailments, but more broadly, the opportunities that present within healthcare for AI to help with is enormous. And that's what, again, bringing back to my career just generally, and, the interest and excitement about MetaOptima generally was this passion to solve big, hairy healthcare problems, but utilizing smart technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So there's the potential for, and the things that we've got in the pipeline over the coming, months and years that will probably speak to those points that you raise, and the more broader use of tech to help in healthcare, I think will be really interesting to play out.
Absolutely. I just noticed you're wearing your Apple smartwatch. And so the question comes down to is, also the interplay between software and hardware. What does that look like? Can those, those inserts that you're using on the phones, can those be embedded into your watch? Ultimately, the other question comes down to is, other types of embedding. Maybe some sort of a photographic film embedded in the skin, just like we've heard of Elon Musk's Neuralink, which is embedded in the skull. So are these things that are all part of potentially the eventual roadmap, the purveyor of new innovations, either at MetaOptima or even within your space as with the MSIA group? What's your thoughts on some of these crazy ideas?
Yeah, I love crazy ideas. And there's some really interesting future, medical futurists that have some great perspective on this and keep up to date in terms of what's, beyond the next couple of years. And some of those are really exciting about, when you look at themes like robotics and 3D printing, genomics, and all those other bits and pieces about hyper-personalized medicines and the abolishing pills and being able to do other crazy things with patches and vaccine mail-outs and all these kind of things. They're all really cool and novel, and they make for interesting reading. In terms of what we do at the Medical Software Industry Association, the problems that we're focusing on right now are very much in the here and now of helping the software vendors that are grappling with everything going on right now, but also the policy, quick changes in policy and the adaptation that needs to be happening. Things like we don't have the FDA here in Australia. We've got the TGA, Therapeutic Goods Association, but then the changes that are likely coming for software vendors when it comes to, SAMD, software as a medical device, regulatory changes, trying to grapple with applying more control and rigor around software that is constantly changing. So like, it's not like a medical device which is static and this is what it is and you can kind of put a box around it, whereas AI and software, it's always updating, it's always developing. How do you regulate something like that? So those are the challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day at the MSIA, and help those that are on the coalface deal with it. But with MetaOptima, in terms of the future, we've something that we'll be releasing at some point next year is our Derm drone product, which is utilizing the intelligence of Derm Engine in terms of its ability to do total body photography, but utilizing drone technology to use within a clinic. So because one thing about doing total body photography, you still need someone to be able, which is where, you're taking a picture of someone's back and then all parts of their body to then compare it over a period of time. Being able to do that in a consistent way is difficult. There are very big machines that you can buy that cost a lot of money for a clinic to use to do that. Whereas what we've done is, essentially by using a relatively cost-effective drone, you can then have the drone fly around a patient, take images of their lesions, stitch it together in a 3D body map in the space of 2 minutes, and then have that load up into the system, and then use all of the diagnostic capability that we've got within there. So that's, you go into our office in Vancouver and there's drones flying around mannequins and stuff like that. It's quite cool. So
Awesome.
It's going to be interesting to see what comes out in 2021.
I love it. And, this idea of robotics and drones, I mean, for that level of intricate accuracy, I mean, you saw that even with Elon Musk and the robot they created to do the stitching, if you will, of all of those components of the Neuralink. I mean, you require that, and again, as you were saying before, it doesn't replace some of the real technical and the medical people. It really just augments what they're doing, and it really elevates the level of accuracy. So I think that is super exciting. We'll certainly be on the watch for that. That is totally cool. Yeah. It's important to note here, though, that all of these interesting technologies, innovations, opportunities for really bleeding edge disruptions can't really take place without a really thorough discussion about healthcare data, privacy, security, ownership, sharing. There's all kinds of discussions about how is cryptocurrency can be, or crypto or blockchain can be used for this. Should patients be reimbursed for their data? How, and what is data security? I oftentimes like to ask people this question: is data security a misnomer? Are we living in a new world where it has to be redefined or even defined? Because we just have to change our mind on what this actually could mean and does mean in the future.
Yeah, I used to joke that if I just had the ability to sell my own data, then I'd probably be much better off, because it's going to happen eventually. Like, someone's going to take it, so I may as well sell it and make a few dollars from it. I'm not sure whether I'd actually do that or not, but it kind of represents the position of some people today that, like you say, it probably needs to be redefined at some point. And it doesn't, and it, within healthcare, you're dealing with really sensitive information, and people say, well, we solve this around financial information. Why can't we solve for this in healthcare? But, even down to if you were to enable the ability for clinics to be able to share information across, particularly as you've got, back to that point around melanographers or other, allied health providers or pharmacists, everyone being able to deliver care for a single patient. So we should be able to spread it out. So then to do that, everyone needs access to the healthcare information. But if you did that, then, the patient may not want their physiotherapist to see their notes from their psychology consultation that they had recently. So how do you deal with this and then still make it a usable system that can be leveraged on a day-to-day without a high level of complexity? And in the end, what happens is that people go, well, this is too hard, and they just don't, comply with it. And that's what we've seen within Australia with the government's My Health Record program, which was, essentially that everyone's got their single health record and all the information's supposed to go up into the My Health Record, and then that's great because clinicians can access it. But in the end, it relies on clinicians sending information up to it. And if the clinicians in Australia this is a while ago, hadn't been convinced of the benefit or the privacy and security controls around it, so they just weren't complying and just weren't sending information. So even when being financially incentivized to do that through rebates, it's still not been, you know, high in terms of adherence. So I think there does definitely need to be a kind of, you know, re-looking at information on how it's handled, you know, the transmission of like seeing some of the work that's being done around secure messaging and general transmission of information. There does probably need to be a step back and look at, well, what's the big picture and how we're going to handle it. I don't know what the answer is right now, but it's going to have to change. And I feel like that's only fast tracking now as more information needs to be made available virtually. And there's only so many, you know, sticks that can be, you know, delivered or, you know, threatened in terms of companies, in terms of, like, there's a lot of fines and a lot of, you know, downsides for doing it wrong, but there's not a great deal of upside in terms of getting it done right yet, other than good patient outcomes and all that, which is hard to I guess justify from an ROI perspective. So it's a challenging one. That's for sure.
It's a really tough one. And I think right now we're going through this with contact tracing. You got some fantastic apps, and you still have people who are just refuse. In Canada, provinces, there's probably even states and, you know, other places across the globe that are just across the board not adopting. There's belief systems on privacy, what a security means, and all these sorts of things. And so even during dire, you know, national calamities, you can't get people to adhere. So it's going to be a very interesting equation. It's probably going to be a requirement of an evolution over years and years before we get into some commonplace, you know, getting out of the mindset of this being some dystopian, you know, ownership, and maybe looking at things a bit more collectively as an opportunity for population management and, you know, and overall health. So I think that's just going to be an evolution. Just curious, in the last few minutes that we have, Peter, you do some really interesting things. We talked a little bit about the work you're doing with the Medical Software Industry Association. And of course, you've got your Talking HealthTech podcast. How do you bring that in? Are these some things that you just like to do outside of MetaOptima? Is it to help your position at the company for contacts, collaborators? How do you sort of tie this all in with an already busy job as a general manager?
Sure. I just don't sleep. No, I do sleep. It's just a passion of mine. I think that's, you know, yeah, there's parts that overlap and that it all benefits, and it's all within the similar sphere and just covering broader circles. And it's interesting, all the conversations that started the podcast 18 months ago, were all leveraging previous conversations that have been had for the business. And there are quite a few conversations, particularly in the earlier episode, the Talking HealthTech, that then, you know, broadened to conversations across MetaOptima or for the MSIA. So there's certainly a lot of leveraging that goes on. But yeah, it's definitely like any kind of passion project or side hustle. You need to have a lot of drive and motivation to get it done. And yeah, it's a challenge from time to time, but, you know, more recently with Talking HealthTech, we've been able to build out a mini team to be able to help it run on day to day. I'm probably doing a little bit less than what I did in the very early stage, just being able to make it, like, we've proven out that there's definitely an interest in that kind of medium and being able to deliver this kind of information via podcast. And now I've got, you know, it's a registered business. We've got people doing stuff around it on a day-to-day. I'm just the pretty face on the airwaves now. So it's
with a big microphone, it looks awesome.
Yeah. It's just for show. It's not even
to this, so
yeah. It's just for show, that's for sure.
That's awesome. This has been absolutely outstanding. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I especially appreciate your keen understanding and very deep involvement with the software industry and just kind of what's bleeding edge and what's new. It's really intriguing to get that perspective, to get your views on all the various stakeholders, you know, including investors, payers, everybody's involved in this, and this, you know, this gradual evolution of a collective in the healthcare space trying to drive change. And we're all we all know where we want to go. It's a matter of us just trying to carve out that roadmap. So find that very exciting. I love what MetaOptima is doing. I'm super excited about seeing the drone. For those of you who are listening, we will be leaving in the show notes information to access Peter in case you want to collaborate, you want to get on his show, you want to find out what you can do with MetaOptima. We'll leave all of those details in the show notes. And certainly we'll also be leaving links to Impetus and the Impetus Insight platform. If you're interested in having some of these courageous conversations, talking about things that are beyond the pill, finding out what else that you need to do, how else you can collaborate with some startup companies, thinking beyond your current business models, your current brands and franchises, to be able to have these collaborative longitudinal engagements with your stakeholders, internal or external. That's what Impetus does through our Insight platform. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to actually increase our expansion and our mission to have some of these really disruptive, courageous conversations. So thanks to all of you who've been able to listen and attend today. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Peter, for a very intriguing, thought-provoking discussion, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you.